Hey everybody, welcome back to my back porch. So, pyramidology, that is the theory that there are hidden pieces of information encoded into the measurements of the Great Pyramid. This is something that Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and some of the Ancient Aliens guys bring up constantly as part of their argument, especially Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. They were together on an episode of Joe Rogan a short while ago, and they talked about this. And being an Egyptophile, you tell me there's some hidden mystery in the pyramid. I am all about it. I want to know if it's true or not. So I started researching it, and these theories have been tried to be debunked by mathematicians that want to look at the mathematical formulas and try and go that way. I don't think you really need to make that approach. Let's just run through it and just ask a few questions and answer it and see if any of this makes any real sense. Is there legit some sort of information encoded in the measurements of the Great Pyramids? So when you hear things like this, the first thing I ask is, well, let's talk about Egyptian numbers. What kind of numbers were they using? And then the math they were using. So their hieroglyphic number system was a base 10 system. It's similar to Roman numerals, except for they didn't have as many numbers, if you will. So basically it was like a mark of 1 through 9 until you got to 10, and then there was no 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. It was just the 10 symbol all the way up till you got to 100, and then there was a 1,000, a 100,000, and a 1 million. So pretty simple number system. Now later on, the scribes started using a writing system called hieratic, which is kind of a cursive writing, and to make it easier, they added some of the numbers in, some more symbols. So you have more things like, a 50 and 500 and things like that. And also the 1 through 9, each one kind of has its own system. So when we look at this, we think of the mathematical equations on the Arabic number system. Let's remember that they're using a base 10 system, and to write the number, like 43,200 is going to be a lot of symbols blocked just to make the one number. But they had the numbering system. So the next question is, did they have the math skills to do something like this? Lucky for us is papyrus has been found. There's 2 known ones. One's in the British Museum, one's in the Moscow Museum, and they're basically the same. And it's kind of like a guidebook for scribes on how to solve mathematical problems. So we'll look at the Rind papyrus, which is in the British Museum, and it shows how to do certain things. How to solve for area, for volume of a pyramid. It gives these examples. How to figure out exactly how much feed for your livestock, the volume of a beer jar, slope, things like that. Kind of like some algebra equations. So they were able to do a lot in this math. So there's a couple things. They did not use decimals. What they did was they used kind of rudimentary fractions, if you will, and they did like to round because their math system preferred. It was much easier if it was in tens and whole numbers, especially if you're dividing. So you would have these fractions, and it could go out into a series of them, and unless you were the one doing the math, you kind of wouldn't be able to figure out how to reverse engineer it. It's kind of complicated. But that's how they dealt with remainders, or what we would call decimals. So kind of a pain in the booty to do it this way. Also, They had it showed how to find the area of circles. Okay, and nowhere in these papyri is a concept of pi in any way. As a matter of fact, what they were doing, they had two ways to get area of a circle. One was to kind of draw lines and make an octagon out of it, and then take those measurements if they were having to do it off paper. If they were doing a physical measurement, they would actually, take a rope or something and measure, say, the bottom of a beer jar. They'd take that and then straighten it out, measure it, and then they would actually make that measurement a square instead of a circle and solve the area. Kind of an elementary way of doing it, but they were able to do it. It gets pretty close, either way, the octagon way or the square way, but as far as we know, they didn't have a pi and they didn't use decimals, okay? But they were able to do it. So if we talk about pi, it'll bring into the first sort of pyramid encoding mystery, and that is dividing measurements, you will get pi. And that's actually true. The measurements of the pyramid, it's built on a 22:7 ratio, and no matter which way you slice it, you'll get pi, and I totally intended that pun. The question is did they know they were doing that? Were they doing it on purpose? Unknown. But in the evidence of those papyri, the scribes didn't have a concept of pi in their guidebooks. I don't think that would be something that was secret knowledge as bent on precision as the Egyptians were. I mean, they invented this math to figure out taxes and pay, literally, and to build structures, figure out volume. So I don't know. I don't think so. It's just, it could be a consequence of just the measurements that they decided to go with, or one of the guys could have had a concept from pi, or they were squaring a circle. Unknown. There's no proof. There's no hard proof that they knew what pi was. Okay. So the next thing we want to get into is I'll pull this particular equation, and this is one that Graham Hancock brings up all the time, and he brought it up with Flint Dipple, and Flint kind of just wrote him off and just gave some BS, well, you can find measurements, which is true, but that's not how you would argue this. I just don't think Flint was prepared for that question. He's a seed expert, an ancient agriculture expert, so he's a specialist. He's not really going to know all the pyramid measurements and whatnot off the top of his head. So I don't think he was prepared to debate that one or really look at it logically. But lucky for all of us, I'm self-employed, and sometimes I can sit here and think about this stuff. So what this boils down to, and we're not going to talk about the actual math as far as there's no way that the formula used, the addition, the multiplication is all correct. What we want to talk about is the variables. So the devil will be in the details. Do these variables make sense? Okay. If we look, this equation he brings up is the base perimeter of 921.455 meters. And you multiply that by 43,200. I'll get to where that number comes from in a second. And it equals 39,806.748, and it switches to kilometers, which is within a margin of error for the circumference of the Earth. So it's pretty close. So this number 43,200, where does that come from? And the way Graham will explain it is it has to do with the precessional cycle of 72 years. And those who don't know about the precessional cycle is the Earth spins, rotates as it goes around the sun. Well, it actually, over the course of time, wobbles back and forth. And the pole actually circles around 360 degrees. Well, that wobble, it moves 1 degree every 72 years. And it makes a complete circle every 25,992 years. A lot of times it's rounded to 26,000. And it goes back and forth. And 43,200 is a factor of 72, the precessional cycle. And so the question there is, did they know about the precessional cycle? Well, they didn't write about it, so there's no hard evidence of that, but could they have known about that precessional cycle? Oh, of course. They were sky watchers. We know that. They loved the sky. The goddess Nut, the sky goddess, was gorgeous in the mythology, and all the stars on the tomb. They had a concept of, they were watching the sky. They used it to plan out agriculture and whatnot, and yes, grant, to align monuments. And so I'm sure they were aware of that precessional cycle to one degree or another. So a few thousand years of watching, somebody's going to figure out at 72 years it switches a little bit, and maybe over time they would figure out it's a much longer cycle. I don't know if they've calculated to the 26,000 years or not. I don't know. But this 43,200 is based on that 72 and a few other factors. We'll go with that. An alternative, another version of where that number 43,200 is significant is it's the exact number of seconds of daylight in an equinox. So, okay, that would be a significant number. And you have to ask, did they know about it? Well, they would have to be using the base 60s time system and taking it down to seconds. We don't know if they were using this base 60 time keeping system, but the Sumerians invented it and they were using it. So this information that could be known. Okay, so 43,200 has significance in other things. And this is a key factor in several of these different versions of pyramidology. Not all of them, but several different versions. So let's take a side trip for a second. Speaking of the number 43,200 in Randall Carlson on Joe Rogan with Graham Hancock, I heard this and this got me thinking, and I wanted to figure it out. They were talking, and Randall Carlson said that the dimensions of the Great Pyramid are such that if you scaled it up 43,200 times, it would fit inside the equator of the Earth. The base would fit at the equator, and all four corners would touch the equator, and the peak would hit the North Pole. And I said, well, that would be cool. Let me check it out. So I try to think, how would you figure that out? So the easiest way would be if you have a circle and then you put the square into it, okay, and you divide that square into two triangles. That hypotenuse goes from corner to corner, and it touches the sphere on both sides. So that would be the diameter of the circle. So if that were true, we would just find the hypotenuse, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and then multiply it by 43,200 and see if that works out. So each side is plus or minus a little bit, 230.6 meters, so we'll use that. You square that, that's 53,176.36. You add that to itself, and you get 106,322.72. Take the square root, which is 326.118, times 43,200, and you get a total of 14,088,297.6. Not even close, because the equatorial diameter in meters is 12,742, or 12,742,000, sorry. It's so that means the pyramid would be a few million meters bigger, and it even in kilometers. If you condense it down to kilometers, it's still several thousand kilometers beyond. So that's not as close as the circumference equation. So I don't know where he got that from, but I don't know. Somebody check my math. Tell me if it was true. I think I got it right. But if you can prove me wrong, I'm welcome to it. I'd love to believe that's true. So let's go back. So we've established this number 43,200. It either deals with a precessional cycle, which would be knowledge they would hide, or time in seconds of half of an equinox. So let's look at the other variable, and that's the addition of the base perimeter equal 921.455 meters. So like I said, it's about 230.6 meters per side. Okay, here's where the hate comes. This equation works so well, but the problem is it only works in metric. So we have to ask, did they know about the metric system and did they use it? So let's look at the history and the archaeology and see what we find out. So the Egyptians used the Egyptian royal cubit, and there's one in the British Museum if you want to see it. They found a cubit stick. And the cubit is, it's about 52.4 centimeters. It was pretty standard. It's divided into 6 palms and then 24 fingers. So these would be like the inches. All right. So that's what they were doing. And if we do the measurements of the pyramid in cubits, it actually equals out to the base sides equaling 440 cubits each and the height being 280. Now, if we think back to the Egyptian numbers and the Egyptian math, this seems more likely that they were using these figures because it's even numbers and they're based in tens. This would be easy for them to figure out the volume of the pyramid in the area. But let's talk about the metric system. So the question is, did they know about the metric system? So there's no evidence of that. Now, so that is something that would need to be proven for this to be talked about as even a possibility. I've seen, I don't want to get into too many of them because none of them really make sense as far as the explanations for this. One is, well, they had to have known about the metric system because you can convert cubits to metric and then therefore the equations work out. No, because you can convert any system to metric, any system to metric. Just because you can convert this to metric and get these numbers is not proof of anything because there's no evidence of it. I've heard that, or I saw somebody said that the metric system may have been sacred knowledge or secret knowledge. Well, that really doesn't make sense. You would have to prove that the ancient Egyptians, a society bent on precision, whose math was really well suited to base 10 and whole numbers, had knowledge of a highly precise measuring system that was based in tens. They didn't write about it. They didn't use it ever. No meter sticks. So there's absolutely no evidence that they had the meter. And as far as modern times, the meter itself is from 1791. And that's the French Academy of Sciences came up with a new version of measurement that could be used, and it's 1/10,000,000th a quarter of the Earth's circumference. And then it's divided by that, and that's where you get the metric system from. So, but there's no evidence prior to that. I don't think that would be any sort of sacred knowledge. A measuring system, I think if you wanted to pass on that you were here, a great civilization, and encode things into it, I would think that the measuring system is something that you would put into there. That's something that you would absolutely, and then everybody would be wondering, where the heck did this come from? It would be your fingerprint. I mean, let's take, for example, Göbekli Tepe, which Graham Hancock and others say, and this may exactly be true, that this ancient civilization, just suffered a huge cataclysm. They go to live with the hunter-gatherers, say, in Turkey. They want to leave a record, a warning, to watch out for the meteors, asteroids coming from the sky from this constellation. We're going to, so they convince all these hunter-gatherers, we're going to show you how to do some basic agriculture so we can all take care of this. Okay, cool. We're going to show you how to make sure these point exactly in the sky where they need to point. That's great. Here, I'm going to show you how to cut these stones and move them and set them up, so that this warning will last forever, right? And then the guy goes, wow, that's great. So how do I make sure the blocks are, all the right? Oh, screw you, you're on your own. They're not going to pass on a measurement system? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you switch to qubits, none of this works out. So, and let's go back. So if they didn't have any access to the metric system, if it's true, you can't find any evidence of it. There's no evidence of the metric system prior to 1791 or even in the ancient world. So if you can't prove that means, in fact, the number 43,200 is an engineered number that whoever came up with this calculation has found significance in to make all this work out. And this has been going on for a long time. And then they point out, hey, they didn't use metric as qubits. And then they argue, well, they had to have known metric. Well, that's an excuse. That's not proof. You have to have the proof. If you can find the proof that they knew about the metric system, then you might have something. I've also had them say, well, you can find metric measurements in other monuments. You can. I mean, my house is built in feet. It's America. And guess what? If I measure between two corners, occasionally I get metric measurements. It's just a coincidence. So unless you can prove it, it's nothing. So if we say that the 43,200 is a backwards engineered number that you can find significance in, is there evidence that this has been going on? So let's talk about John Taylor in the 19th century. And they were measuring the pyramid in imperial, which is feet and inches. And he took the measurements in regular inches and then used the number of days of 364.25, right? And then divided by 100, he came up with something called the pyramid inch. He said, well, this pyramid they must have used that because the 364.25 day of the year, that this equals out with this pyramid inch. And people have used this pyramid inch to engineer other numbers. Guess what? He made it up. He reverse engineered the pyramid inch because the pyramid inch doesn't fit anything else. It doesn't fit centimeters, it doesn't fit imperial inches, and it definitely doesn't fit fingers. Okay? So this has been going on for a while. So when you have things like this, where people spout that as gospel, something that he literally back engineered and made up to make his equations work in the 19th century. And then we come into this, somebody has taken numbers and reverse engineered modern measuring systems to come up with a number that then they have to figure out has significance. Oh, this has significance. Well, 43,200. It only makes sense as the number of seconds in a day. The other factors of 72, it's a little too much. Why didn't they use 25,992 if they knew about precession? Why does it have to be this? Why didn't Why doesn't it work out in cubits instead of metric? It's just a lot that when you really, really sit and think about it, this stuff doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff that hasn't been proven, and then you get Graham and Randall coming on and going, like, this is gospel. This is true. In reality, it's not. Because they're using numbers that have really no significance as long as you're using metric or using a made-up measuring system like Pyramidology. Doesn't make any sense. Oh, it could be. The bottom line is they used cubits. Their math was better suited for the measurements of the pyramid. They used decimals. As far as we know, they didn't have a concept of the actual pi, even though it does end up in the equation. I just think as far as Graham Hancock is concerned, with all the legitimate, concrete evidence that you can physically put your hands on and go for the theory you've been researching for 30 years, legitimate stuff. For whatever reason, I don't know why this is the hill he wants to die on. Every time you bring up the pyramid, he didn't even make up these equations, but he darn sure believes them. I don't think he just really has the time to sit down and think about it. He's researching so many different disciplines that he doesn't know every little thing. And when you get up against some mainstream person, they don't know all this. You got to kind of like have a football team to hash this out. You know, Graham has got a whole team, but you send up one player at a time. You have to have a bunch of people together to hash out the different disciplines. Otherwise, it's not going to end well. Anyway, that's it. That's just one man's opinion. If I'm wrong, tell me. I'm sure you will, but I say actually look into these actual measurements and actual math and actual numbers. And remember, the Egyptians were problem solvers. They had enormously successful agricultural industry to the point where only about a quarter of the population was devoted to agriculture, and a lot of people could do what civilizations do. People can pursue their skills. You got critical thinkers and problem solvers and engineers. They're able to do that for a living. And they built a giant mountain out of stone. And amazing feat. I think if you really want to prove anything's in there, just use the actual measurements. Anyway, that's enough of that stupid rant. Anyway, like, subscribe, comment, call me nasty names, I don't care. Other than that, thanks for showing up on the back porch. Next time I have a rant about ancient Egypt, I'll let you know. Thank you.